Hello, how are you? My name is Gaurav. I am a student of Vedic Astrology. I keep posting my findings on this channel, and today I'm going to help you identify the career best suited for you from your charts. To do so, you'd have to analyze the 10th, the 6th and the 11th house. Why particularly these houses? The 10th house would reveal your profession. For example, you could be a doctor. The 6th house, however, is going to reveal the nature of your work. For example, you're a surgeon. You're a doctor, but you are a surgeon. The 11th house would determine how exactly are you going to make money. So naturally, it's linked to your job. And on what scale? For example, if you're practicing privately or you're working across different hospitals. I'm going to demonstrate how to do this through an example, and I'm also going to share some combinations at the end for the following 9 careers: law, medicine, finance, business, academics, government work, engineering, artistic careers, and careers which are uncommon. So if you'd like to jump straight away to combinations related to a specific career of your choice, you can do so by following the timelines in the description section of this video. Now, how do we identify the career best suited for you? And it starts with analyzing the houses that I'd mentioned earlier. Now, how do you analyze the house? You analyze it by answering some simple questions. What are those questions? The first question is, who is the ruler of that house? It's very simple to identify that. If you're unfamiliar with some of the basics on how to do this, you can also watch the video I've posted on this channel on how to read one's chart. Now, that's the first question. The second question is, where is it placed? In which house, in which sign, in which nakshatra? The third question is, where is the nakshatra's planetary ruler placed? In which house, in which sign, in which nakshatra? And now, the third question gets often neglected, as this is a question which do not occur to us whilst we are reading a chart, and therefore it's important for you to follow and answer question 3 as well. Let's take an example right away. If you look at this birth chart, this is for a person I'm going to be analyzing with you. In his case, the ruler of his career house is Venus, which is then placed in the 5th house, in the sign of Sagittarius, in the nakshatra of Uttar Ashadha. Now, who is the nakshatra's planetary ruler? That is Sun, and Sun in his chart is placed there in the 7th house, in the 11th sign, the sign of Aquarius, in the nakshatra Shatabisha. I hope you now understand how have I answered these questions, which naturally is about how to read a chart. I'm not simply going to leave you with the answers to these questions. We are also going to interpret these planetary positions to identify the career best suited for him. Now we are analyzing where is the house ruler in the main chart placed in the Navamsha chart, in which house and in which sign. Then we are going to study the sign ruler in the Navamsha to study where is it placed in the main chart. So what I've done here, it may sound complicated, it's very logical. We are going from the main chart to the Navamsha chart, identifying where the house ruler is placed there, and from the Navamsha chart we are going back to the main chart to study where the sign ruler is placed in the main chart. Now let's study that. In this person's case, Venus is in the Navamsha, placed in the 1st house, in the 9th sign, in the sign of Sagittarius. That's the answer to question number 4. Now, answer to question number 5 is the sign ruler. Here, I'm referring to the sign in the Navamsha chart, which is the sign of Sagittarius. This is ruled by Jupiter. Now, Jupiter in his main chart is placed there in the 11th house, in the sign of Gemini, in the nakshatra of Punarvasu. So we have now also answered question 4 and 5. Question 6 and 7 are similar. This time we are going to study the D10 chart instead of the D9 chart. Venus now in the Dasamsha chart, the D10 chart, I find to be placed in the 5th house, in the 6th sign, the sign of Virgo. Mercury is the planetary ruler of the sign of Virgo, which in the main chart is placed there in the 6th house. It's further placed there in the sign of Capricorn, in the nakshatra of Shravana. So we have now answered questions 6 and 7 too. Now Question number 8 is about conjunctions and aspects. Is the planet, the ruler of the house we are analyzing, is it conjunct with another planet? Which houses is that planet ruling? I know it's complicated. When we interpret this, it would become easy, I promise you. And is any planet having an aspect on the ruler of the house we are analyzing? Also study wherever the house ruler is placed. For example, for this person, Venus is the ruler of the 10th house, which is placed there in the 5th house. Is it aspecting any other house? Yes, it is. It's aspecting the 11th house. Question number 9 is a very simple one. Which planets are placed there and which houses are they ruling in the house we are analyzing? So we are going to study the 10th house in the main chart, the Navamsha and the Dasamsha, and study which planetary energies are having an impact, which might also have an impact on what we interpret from the house we are analyzing. Now, question number 10, this is the last question. How are the house rulers placed in the Dasamsha chart? So here what I'm doing, I'm studying the D10 charts individually. If we were to study the Navamsha chart, the 10th house ruler is Mercury. We are studying now its position within the D9 chart. Similarly, in the Dasamsha, the 10th house ruler is Saturn and Rahu. We are going to study Saturn and Rahu's position, as the 10th house falls in the 11th sign, co-ruled by Saturn and Rahu. So we are going to study Saturn and Rahu's position in the D10 chart. So what we have done by answering these questions is to have a methodology, a framework, and how we can understand the meaning of the house. So let's now interpret these combinations. Now, if you were to study the 10th house ruler, Venus, which is in the 5th house, in the Nakshatra Uttarashadha, in the sign of Sagittarius. So I'm going to analyze all of this together. Venus in the 5th house, to me, is a sign of an innovator, as innovation is strongly linked with Venus, particularly if it's placed 8 places away. The Nakshatra Uttarashadha signifies that this person is likely to do things on a large scale, on a global scale. Uttarashadha's planetary ruler is Sun, and Sun is in the 7th house. This, to me, is an indication the person has leadership potential, and Sun in the 7th is a sign that this person could be a public figure. The Nakshatra Shatabisha is signifying to me a person's professional image is likely to be very secretive, very confidential. So even though he might be a public figure, he might have plans which are highly secretive. Venus in the Navamsha is there in the 1st house, in the sign of Sagittarius, ruled by Jupiter. Jupiter in the 11th. 11th house is about businesses, and so is the Nakshatra Punarvasu. Firstly, Venus's position there in the 1st house is a sign to me this person is very likely to be a public figure and is also likely to be famous. And his work not only is innovative, which we found in the main chart, to me it's also likely this person is going to be a business person, as Venus in Sagittarius, Jupiter, which is now the ruler of Sagittarius, is in the house of money, in the Nakshatra of Punarvasu, which belongs to a merchant. The Nakshatra Punarvasu is directly linked to the care industry, so his work is likely to target the care industry. Let's now look into the D10 chart. Here I find Venus there in the 5th house. Further signs of his work being highly innovative. It's there in the sign of Virgo, ruled by Mercury, which is there now in the 6th house in the main chart, in the Nakshatra Shravana. You'd find this interesting. The Nakshatra Shravana belongs to the telecom sector. It belongs to all businesses which are in mass media, telecom being one of the prime examples. Thing is it conjunct or aspected by any planet? Yes, I find Venus and Ketu's association there, particularly in the divisional chart, which to me is a sign this person's work can be linked to his past life, but also futuristic, as Ketu is placed there in the Nakshatra ruled by Rahu. It does have an aspect of Saturn on it, which simply is a sign to me this person's work may require a lot of hard work. We'll analyze Saturn, as Saturn in his chart is the ruler of the 6th house. And I also find Jupiter having an aspect on Venus in the main chart itself, which is a sign, further signs that his work is likely to be in the business world, as Jupiter is occupying the section of the sky belonging to a merchant. Question number 9 is we don't have to analyze, as we do not find any planet there in the 10th house in all the three charts, the main, Navamsha and the Dasamsha. Now question number 10 is very interesting. Mercury is the ruler of his career house in the Navamsha chart, and it's placed there in the sign of Cancer in the 8th house. We are now going to go from the Navamsha to the main chart. The sign of Cancer is ruled by Moon. Moon, incidentally, is also placed there in the 8th house in the Nakshatra of Uttabhadappada. This to me is a sign that this person's business can be also centered around understanding consumer behavior, or simply linked to the field of psychology, and may also be therapeutic in nature, as those businesses are directly related to Moon. Now in the Dasamsha, I find Saturn as the ruler. Saturn and Rahu, both of them are ruling his career house, the 10th house. Saturn in the Dasamsha is placed there in the 3rd house in the sign of Cancer. Further signs of his work being therapeutic in nature, as the ruler of the 10th house in the Navamsha and the Dasamsha are occupying the signs ruled by Moon. And Rahu, as I mentioned, is also ruling the 10th house in the D10 chart, and it's placed there in the 11th house, which is a sign of ambition, and also the person can be highly innovative and could also be running a business, as it's occupying the 12th sign ruled by Jupiter. And I've already mentioned that Jupiter in his chart is occupying the section of the sky that belongs to a merchant, and since it's the Nakshatra Punarvasu, the person's work is likely to be on a large scale. So what have we found from this analysis? He's likely to be an innovator. He's likely to do things on a large scale, a public figure. He has leadership potential. His personality from a work point of view could be secretive, and his work is likely to be futuristic, as the Nakshatra Shatabisha is ruled by Rahu, and his secretive personality is due to Sun's position there in Shatabisha. He's likely to be a self-made person, which is a point I should have made right at the beginning. Venus in this chart is not ruling his 10th house, it's also ruling the 3rd house, which to me is a sign that this is a self-made person, a self-made business person, as we've repeatedly found combinations related to his work being in the business world, particularly within mass media in the telecom sector and the care and convenience sector. Convenience, why? As the Nakshatra Uttabhadappada is a lot to do with lack of physical mobility. Perhaps his business is in the domain of not only providing care, but also making things very convenient for people. So that's what I see from his 10th house. I'll reveal the identity of this person at the end. Let's now look at the 6th house. So the 6th house in his chart is ruled by Saturn, which is placed there in the 3rd house in the Nakshatra Vishakha, which is ruled by Jupiter. Jupiter further is there in the 11th house in Punarvasu. So Saturn in Vishakha to me is a sign of a very ambitious person and a stubborn business person. Why am I linking him to business with Saturn? Saturn in his chart is also ruling the 7th house, which is the house related to business, and so is the 3rd house. So the 3rd, 7th and the 11th house, which I would also be sharing later, are houses related to businesses. Since Saturn is there in Vishakha, he's going to be a very stubborn person, someone who's not going to easily give up, and may also possess a very exacting nature. Vishakha is one of the most ambitious nakshatras. I also find, since Saturn is occupying the nakshatra ruled by Jupiter, he'll be blessed with patience and wisdom. He's likely to also be running a large-scale business, particularly in the healthcare sector or the care industry, as Saturn is occupying the nakshatra ruled by Jupiter, which is in Punarvasu firstly, and then business is likely to be on a large scale, as Jupiter is there in the 11th house. Now Saturn in the Navamsha is there in the 7th house in the sign of Gemini. He's likely to be in business once again, as the 7th house and the sign of Gemini are to do with businesses. The sign of Gemini is ruled by Mercury, which is placed in the main chart in the 6th house in the Nakshatra Shravana, which once again is linking his business to the field of mass media and to the telecom sector. Now I'm going to study its position there in the D10 chart, where I find Saturn in the 3rd house in the sign of Cancer. Cancer is ruled by Moon, Moon there in the 8th house in the Nakshatra Uttabhadappada. I find further signs his business is likely to be related to providing care and convenience. Now, is it conjunct aspected by any planet? Jupiter is having an aspect which is simply a sign that his work can be business related. Rahu also is having an influence which can lead to his work being futuristic. Saturn, incidentally, this is very interesting, is from the 3rd house, is having an aspect on the 5th and the 9th house. The 5th and the 9th house has to do with education. Now Saturn's influence could be an indication that this person may have found or could have found education related activities very difficult to pursue. He actually gave up his bachelor's degree in the first year itself whilst he was going through Saturn's Antardasha. This is a clue as to who this person is. Now, which planets are there in the 6th house? I do find Mercury and Mars there. Mercury's introduction in the 6th house are further signs of work can be in business, as Mercury is a natural signifactor of businesses, and Mars's position is a sign of his work can also be highly technical and engineering related. A more technical and engineering related business which is related to Shravana is the telecom sector. Now, how are the house rulers placed in the D charts? Venus is the ruler of the 7th house. It's placed there in the 1st house in the sign of Sagittarius. Simply makes him a public figure in my view, and Venus is placed there in the 5th house in the sign of Virgo in the Dasamsha chart, which is simply a sign of an innovator. So what have we found from our analysis? To me, it appears this person would be very ambitious, would also be very stubborn, would never give up. It's based on Saturn's position in the 3rd in the Nakshatra of Vishaka, and it's ruling the 6th and the 7th house. Patience and wisdom too. He's not going to give up, but also someone who possesses patience in building what he's building, as that's the quality of Saturn. Doing things on a large scale. Punarvasu ruled by Jupiter, firstly. That's a sign of a large scale business. The 11th house is a sign of a large scale business, and so is the Nakshatra Punarvasu, which is an indication that his business could be providing a service which is related to care or convenience. And I also find Mercury now very strongly related to his business. Mercury in Shravana is directly relating his business to the field of mass media and the telecom sector. So that's my analysis of the 6th house. Let's now study the 11th house. Well, the 11th house analysis becomes very interesting as Mercury is ruling both his money related houses, and it's placed there in the 6th house in the Nakshatra Shravana. Shravana's planetary ruler is Moon there in the 8th house in Uttarapada. All of this is a sign that his business. Why business? Mercury is ruling the 2 houses related to money, and Mercury is a signifactor of a business, and his position there in Shravana is a very clear sign that his business is likely to be linked to the field of mass media or to the telecom sector. And Shravana is all about doing things on a large scale, and since it's occupying the Nakshatra ruled by Moon, it can also be in the care and convenience sector, within the telecom sector, within the mass media sector. Mercury in the Navamsha is once again occupying the sign ruled by Moon, so I'll draw the same conclusion. I would also classify Mercury's position in the Navamsha as the one belonging to someone who understands consumer behavior, so he'll have a good understanding of what people want. And Mercury's position now in the Dasamsha is that it's occupying the 12th house, and it's occupying the sign of Aries ruled by Mars. Mars is there in the 9th house in the Nakshatra of Ashwini. I simply see signs that this person's business could be large scale and international, as that's what I gather from the 12th house, the 9th house and the Nakshatra of Ashwini, which is related to Mercury's position in the Dasamsha. Now, I do find Jupiter's presence there in the main and the Dasamsha in the house of money, which simply is a sign of a person who could have the ability to run a large-scale business. And how are the house rulers placed? In the Navamsha, Venus is the ruler of the house of money, and it's placed there in the 1st house in the sign of Sagittarius, which once again is a sign this person could be a public figure. Jupiter in the Dasamsha is the ruler of the 11th house and is also placed there, which simply is a sign this person has the capability to run a large-scale business. And what have we found from the 11th house analysis? A large-scale business, particularly in the mass media or the telecom sector. It's likely to be related to the care industry and providing some sort of convenience, and therefore it can also be related to social welfare. He does appear to have a great understanding of consumer behavior, and business is likely to be international. I'm ready now at this stage to reveal the identity of this person. This chart we've analyzed belongs to Steve Jobs. Now, how is his business linked to the telecom sector? I think the iPhone was the flagship product he launched, which naturally is about linking people. And if you have the time, if you were to go through the video I've posted on the Nakshatra of Shravana on this channel, you'll understand exactly why an iPhone is linked to Shravana. And time and again I kept running into combinations which revealed that his business could be Shravana related, as Mercury is occupying this section of the sky. And his business was international, was on a large scale. He was a secretive kind of a person and also a public figure. We all know him. So I hope I've done justice to his analysis. I know I ran through his analysis, but I just wanted to share the highlights with you, as now we come to the main topic, and that is to identify combinations that belong to specific careers. So let's now do that. Now, the methodology is we are going to see a link of the 6th, 10th and the 11th house with certain planets, signs and nakshatras, and in combination they might reveal which career is best suited for you. When we study planets and they're linked to these houses, the 6th, 10th and the 11th house, we'd see if the planets are either ruling it or placed there, or the house rulers are placed in particular signs or nakshatras. So let me now take an example. Let's study law. If the following planets are linked to the 6th, 10th or the 11th house, there's a possibility that you can be in the field of law. Law is mainly a Mars-related profession, as naturally it requires a bit of courage and competitiveness, which is something Mars can bestow on the native. I can also see someone who has Sun linked to the 6th, 10th or the 11th house can be in the field of law, but in that case the person is likely to be part of the government sector. For example, the native can be a public prosecutor. If Saturn is involved, the person can be in public service. For example, the person can be a notary providing some sort of a service. If Jupiter is involved, the person's profession can be more linked to policy making and also law, which is linked to immigration, or perhaps even the person can build one's career in judiciary. If Mercury is there, the person can be actively involved in framing the argument or actually arguing for one's clients, like a barrister. If Moon is involved, the person's work can be centered around themes of human rights or environmental law, employment law, personal injury, etc. If Venus is involved, it can be linked to mergers and acquisitions or relationship and related laws. If Rahu is there, it can be immigration and international law. If Ketu is involved, it can be criminal law, which I think is also related to Mars. Now, houses. Now, if the rulers of the 6th, 10th or the 11th house are linked to the following houses, then also career can be in the field of law. What are these houses? The 6th house, which is to do with disputes, public service, the 7th house, which has to do with mergers and settlements, and the 9th house, which has to do with public policy. So I would classify these houses related to the field of law. Now, the most important thing, what about nakshatras? If planetary rulers of these three houses are placed there in the following nakshatras, then yes, there's a possibility you could be in the field of law. Uttarashadha, this nakshatra is all about fighting the big fight. So in this case, you might be someone who's fighting against climate change from a legal point of view. You may also be involved in large-scale lawsuits like class action lawsuits. Shravana is a lot about public policy on a national, perhaps even on an international level. Bharani is all about deciding criminality. Pusha and Kritika are more about training the trainers. They're more related to understanding the philosophy of law and why we are doing what we are doing. Kritika is more to do with legal education as well, so the person's career could follow that direction. Uttara Falguni and Anuradha, given their nature, is more about mergers and acquisitions and contracts law. Magha is more related to you being a government worker. Again, you could also end up making a name for yourself, as that's the theme of Magha. So you can have your own independent legal practice, or you could carry on your family's name. Vishakha and Jyeshtha is a lot about being very competitive, and therefore the person would like to be the most senior most or the best person in this profession. That's Vishakha and Jyeshtha's energy. If you have Ashlesha's influence, perhaps your legal profession is centered around providing a prevention strategy, for example, working on anticipatory bails or avoiding government penalties. That could be the nature of your work if Ashlesha is linked to these houses and their rulers. And what about signs? The signs of Virgo, Libra and Sagittarius, the same as the houses. So together I'm sharing all combinations which can indicate your career could be in the field of law. Alright, let's do medicine. So we are trying to see a link of certain planets, houses, signs and nakshatras. The houses we already know are the 6th, 10th and the 11th house, which we analyze to identify one's career. Now, what about planets? Which planets could indicate a profession in the field of medicine? It's moon related. It's very clear to me, and I've seen endless examples of people having moon as the ruler of one of these houses, and they are in the field of medicine. Venus is also linked to the field of medicine, as it's the planet of unconditional love and affection, and therefore nursing and other medical professionals could also have a strong Venus or Venus linked to these houses. Sun is classified as an eradicator of diseases, and therefore Sun is a natural healer, and therefore it's linked to the field of medicine. In this order, mainly I find Moon, then Venus, then Sun. I also find Mars's association, but if Mars is involved, the person's career is likely to be on the surgical side, and the same I can say about Saturn. With Saturn, I'd also say the person's career could be to do with elder care or treatment of long-term health diseases. With Jupiter, the person can be a general physician, could be involved in medical study, medical research. With Mercury, the native specialization could be centered around mental health, skin care, or the person again can be a lifelong student of medical science. With Rahu and Ketu, you get unconventional healing methods, the pharmaceutical sector, and with Ketu you'd also associate the native's path linked to ancient sciences and ancient medicines. Now, what about houses? From the 1st to the 12th house, you can divide the human body. The first house is the head. The second house is the throat area and parts of the human body around the face area. So if the second house is involved, the person can be a dentist. The 4th house is involved, the person can be a heart surgeon, for example. If the 8th house is involved, this is important, and I get to meet people through my website who are working in gynecology and childbirth related treatments. The 8th house has to do with reproductive organs. The 12th house has to do with feet. So the houses would also determine the area of specialization. Now the nakshatras, Ashwini is directly linked to healing methodologies of all kinds, even the ones which can be classified as magical. Sometimes we do come across a treatment which is classified as a breakthrough in that particular domain. I think it's very linked to Ashwini. Ashwini in particular is related to restoration of sight, listening ability and even youthfulness. It's also linked to providing some sort of social services within the medical sector, like providing ambulance services and related businesses. Ashwini is classified as belonging to a merchant. Bharani is a lot to do with childbirth and innovation in medical science. Ardra is related to herbs therapy and also related to wildlife. Punavasu is the most maternal nakshatra, so this natural care and affection we feel for people is very Punavasu-like, and therefore all professions in medical science, in my view, are linked to Punavasu. All areas of specialization, therefore, in my view, are linked to Punavasu. I would also link Punavasu to the travel industry and the hospitality sector, given its nature. Ashlesha is a lot to do with mental health and the field of psychology. Hasta, Chitra and Kritika are linked to the surgical side of medical science. Kritika is where I find Moon to be exalted, and therefore it's directly linked to medical science. Mula is all about providing relief from suffering and cracks on the human body, and also ancient healing practices are related to Mula. With Rohini you get beauty, enhancement, in particular and related treatments. Purvashadha is also related to beauty enhancement treatments, but also purification therapies, from fasting to cancer therapies. For example, Shatabisha is all about future and innovation and medical research. Revati and Purvashadha would also link to the travel industry. So in this exercise, I'm also sharing a few combinations which are linked to the hospitality and the travel sector. Signs which I see which are linked to medical science is the sign of Cancer mainly. And for travel and hospitality, I also look at Sagittarius and the sign of Pisces. So this completes my discussion on the healthcare sector. If you have some of these combinations, then medicine could be your future. So let's have a conversation on the finance sector. If you're planning to build your career in this industry, which possible combinations could indicate that? Amongst planets, Venus is a natural significant of money, and therefore it's directly linked to the finance sector. If Mercury is involved with the 6th, 10th and 11th house, the person can be more on the financial advisory side, more business side. If Mars is there, the person's work can be all about solving complex problems, such as being a financial analyst. If Saturn is involved, the person's work can be centered around themes of risk management or long-term investment strategies. If Jupiter is involved, the person's work can be centered around building a growth strategy, as Jupiter has a lot to do with growth of money. If Sun is involved, the person's work can be with government financial institutions. When Moon is involved, the person's work can be centered around personal banking, for example. When Rahu is involved, the person's work can be centered around modern financial solutions, like a platform for investment in cryptocurrency. And if Ketu is involved, the person's work can be centered around finance and research, as Ketu possesses piercing logic. Now, which houses are linked to the finance sector? If I find the 6th, 10th or the 11th house linked to the 2nd house in particular, I find this to be a very strong indication the person's career could be in the finance sector. The 5th house has to do with speculative businesses, and therefore the work can be within the finance sector but more speculative in nature. The 6th house has to do with providing a service, and therefore within the finance sector the person's work could be in accountancy or banking. The 8th house is insurance and taxation. The 11th house is working for a large financial corporation. Now let's have a look at the nakshatras. If Ashwini is involved, the person's work may involve fast thinking, like an intraday trader. If Rohini is involved, the person's work might be investing in luxury goods and services or high value investments. That's Rohini related. Rohini, in my view, is directly linked to the finance sector. If Ashlesha is involved, work can be centered around planning for the future and risk management. Purva Falguni is directly related to VC firms, investment banks, and simply investing in stock markets. Dhanishta is a lot about making a name for yourself and also having a sense of timing. So you could have a personal brand, and you may also be known for your sense of timing, when to invest, when to quit, etc. Purvashadha is all about high risk, high growth investment strategies are linked to the Nakshatra Purvashadha. Now, the signs that I see with the finance sector is mainly the 2nd sign, the sign of Taurus, which is similar to the 2nd house. And so these are the combinations I see in a person's chart if the person wants to pursue a career in the finance sector. Let's now look at educators and researchers. I do happen to meet a lot of them through far away. I also do classify myself as a researcher. So it's a very Jupiter related profession, line of work. Of all the planets, I find Jupiter most closely linked to the field of education and research, closely followed by Mercury. So if you have Jupiter and Mercury linked to the 6th, 10th and 11th house in some ways, then this profession is the right option for you. Saturn is also linked, but more to do with long-term study, perhaps even ancient sciences, that's Saturn related. With Sun, you'd find you being a bit of an inspiration to people. For example, a business leader who is inspiring young leaders, and by doing what you are doing, you are indirectly educating and inspiring others. If Mars is there, then the theme of education can be centered around physical activity or the engineering sector, which is Mars related. When Venus is involved, then education can be centered around arts and cultures. If Moon is involved, then education can be in healthcare. You can be an educator in that sector, or the hospitality sector. But mainly Jupiter and Mercury. With Mercury, you also find yourself as a language teacher, as that's very Mercury related. Now, what about the houses? The fourth house, in my view, is linked to school education. The fifth house is bachelors. And if we go from 5 places away from the fifth house, we reach the ninth house. 5 from the 5 is the ninth house, and that becomes master's education. So if the 6th, 10th or the 11th house is linked to houses related to education, then naturally you could find yourself in the education sector. Now, if we do the same thing from the 5th, we went to the 9th by counting 5 places. From the 9th, if you count 9 places, you'll eventually come back to the 5th house. So a higher version of the 9th house is linked to spiritual wisdom and ancient sciences, which are also seen from the 5th house. You could be an educator related to those themes if you have a connection with the 5th house. Now, what about the nakshatras? Let's do that. Kritika is directly related to all kinds of government-funded educational institutes, or educational institutes of all kinds. I would rank Kritika as most closely linked to the field of education and research. Purva Falguni, as it belongs to the caste of Varna of a Brahmin, it also is very directly linked to the education sector, particularly more related to the finance sector, the fashion sector, social media. Those themes are linked to Purva Falguni. Purva Ashadha is more about motivation and the travel sector. Purva Bhadapada is all about motivation to bring about a transformation in the lives of others. For example, you might say, I want to bring about a change in the life people are living by motivating them to, for example, be more productive in life. So Purva Ashadha and Purva Bhadapada also are directly linked to the education sector. Now, Pushya is all about training the educators, training the teachers. So Pushya is now the one who is responsible for mentorship and related professions. That's Pushya for you. And also I would classify researchers having a very strong Pushya's influence on their lives, given this nakshatra is ruled by Saturn. Ardra is a lot to do with wildlife, travel, technology and the future, and so you could be educating people on those areas. Mula is directly related, in my view, to the field of research, as it's all about getting to the bottom of things. And a Mula native can also be someone who may lock oneself in a closed room and may not come out until the solution or the research has been accomplished. So it's all about removal of distractions. So the person can go to the extreme while pursuing their research. Shatabisha also has this extreme tendencies associated with one's research, but with Shatabisha you could find a researcher whose work is centered around medical science, and work has to be futuristic, as Shatabisha's planetary ruler is Rahu. Swati is also about research, being on the move on a mental plane in particular. I personally know a medical researcher who has a very strong Swati's influence on her chart. Anuradha as a nakshatra is also related to the field of research. Here work can be centered around identification of patterns, data analytics, and also the ability that the native might possess to rise above facts and figures and look at one's field of study in a more philosophical point of view. Anuradha is also about bringing people together, so the person's education style could also be about bringing more harmony and peace into relations, for example, and that might be the native style. With Revati you get a language teacher and also someone who can also end up being a spiritual leader. So those are the nakshatras which are linked to educators and researchers. Now let's study the combinations that belong to a business person. I know this is an aspiration for many to start a business. So if the 6th, 10th or the 11th house is linked to Mercury, this planet mainly signifies businesses. If Moon is involved, then the person may also be involved in business, but more like a caretaker, as that's the function of Moon. If Mars is involved, then there's naturally a very strong entrepreneurial spirit. the courage and determination to go through the challenges if you're starting a business by yourself. If Sun is there, then you do possess leadership qualities, the ability to rally people around you and build a team. If Saturn is there, then you would excel in businesses which are more service oriented. If Jupiter is involved, then perhaps your work has to be educational one way or the other. If Venus is there, you can be in the business of luxury goods and services, and your business can also be centered around fashion and the beauty sector. If Rahu is involved, your business can be very futuristic and perhaps a bit unconventional as well. And if Ketu is involved, your business can be research driven and also linked to ancient sciences, which I would also link to Saturn, as Saturn not only is related to service related businesses, but also businesses which are related to ancient sciences. Now, what about nakshatras? The first one is Ashwini. Ashwini belongs to the caste Varna of a merchant as per Vedic astrology. So business is very closely linked to the field of Ashwini. But with Ashwini, the theme of your business should be public service, social welfare. So therefore you could be in the healthcare business. For example, you could run a pharmacy. If Bharani is involved, then your business is likely to be highly innovative and you would have the ability to run a large-scale business. If Rohini is involved, your business could be centered around themes of luxury goods and services, the finance sector, the fashion sector, the beauty sector. If Punavasu is there, the theme of your business could be centered around hospitality and the healthcare sector. With Ashlesha, you could be providing security services, or it could be home security services, or it can also be a law firm. And also business can be centered around themes of sex and glamour, fashion, sex and glamour, which is very closely linked to Ashlesha. With Magha, you could be in a family run business, or you may start a business with your name and you leave a legacy of some kind behind. With Hasta, you're likely to be a self-made business person, and you're also going to be someone who might be a promoter of business ethics. People might follow your lead and they might value your way of doing a business. With Chitra, you could be in an artistic business like an architect, or you can also be running a fitness center, as this nakshatra's planetary ruler is Mars. With Vishakha and Jyeshtha comes innovation, drive, and this burning desire to do something big, and therefore I would classify Vishakha and Jyeshtha very closely linked to not only a business but being a business leader, as this nakshatra's ruler is Lord Indra. With Shravana, you would find businesses related to mass media, telecom sector. You may also find businesses which are cutting across different cultures and geographies. With Revati, you'll find all businesses which are in the domain of providing some form of consultancy or advisory. When it comes to signs, I would link Gemini very close to businesses, as its planetary ruler is Mercury. These combinations now are all combinations, in my view, that belongs to a business person. Now let's look at government work. I know in some economies working for the government can have many benefits, and some of us really aspire to work for the government. Now Sun and Saturn are directly linked to government work. With Sun, you'd find yourself in a position of power. The power also to be able to penalize people. For example, you could be a tax officer or a traffic policeman. With Saturn, you are in government work, but you're mainly in public service. For example, you could be working as a nurse in a government hospital. So there's a difference there. If Mars is involved within the government sector, I think your work could be centered around maintenance of law and order. When Jupiter is involved, your work can be more ministerial, more related to policy making. It could also be in judiciary and even related to the education or the travel sector in some ways. When Venus is involved, your work once again can be ministerial but centered around themes of culture, art and music. When Mercury is involved, you could end up being working for the government but as a spokesperson, a planner, or as an organizer. When Moon is involved, you might find yourself in a very comfortable government position, similar to the one occupied by the Queen in Kingdom. When Rahu is there, you could be a government official for a foreign country. So government, foreign officials are Rahu related in my view. And when Ketu is involved, your work can be centered around espionage. Now, amongst the houses, I look at the 6th and the 10th house. For the same reasons, the 6th house has to do with public service, and I think is more Saturn related and related professions within the government sector. With the 10th house, I look at positions of power. Now, amongst the nakshatras, I find Pushya very closely linked to government work, as it's a lot about policy making. So politicians and policy makers are seen from Pushya. With Uttarashadha, your government work can be on a large scale, on a national scale. Perhaps your work is centered around themes of human rights, so climate change, or even immigration. With Uttar Falguni, your work can be centered around partnerships with the private sector, or it can be linked to the field of law. With Uttar Bhadapada, you might find yourself in a position of high responsibility, but at the same time low mobility, as that's directly linked with Uttar Bhadapada. For example, you could be a tax collector or a government bus driver. These professions require you to be at one place for a long time, and they are not very physically challenging, as that's linked to the nakshatra of Uttar Bhadapada. With Kritika, you could be involved with government work, which is linked to the education sector. With Rohini, you can be responsible for trade of luxury goods and services, and you may also find yourself in a position of a caretaker. With Magha and Jyeshtha, you may find yourself in the highest possible position of power, for example, a mayor of a city. With Shravana, the work is likely to be centered around themes of law and order, and also international communications. With Anuradha, you could be a negotiator, a peacemaker, a diplomat, a collaborator, working for the government. With Bharani, again, law and order and judiciary. With Ashlesha, you may find yourself working in secret services. With Revati, you may find yourself working in the transportation sector or in government advisory. As far as signs are concerned, I look at the 5th sign as it's ruled by Sun. I also look at the 10th sign as it's ruled by Saturn. So these signs indicate government work, and along with the nakshatras and the planets and the houses that I've shared earlier. These are all combinations that belong to government work, and if that's your aspiration, I hope you have a few of these combinations. Now, I know a lot of us are working in the technical sector, as that's becoming a very lucrative option for a lot of us, not just information technology, but otherwise as well. Engineering is one of the prime careers people, particularly in India, follow. So what combinations could belong to the ones who are working in the technical industry? Amongst planets, I find Mars and Saturn very close to careers which are highly technical in nature, as Mars-related professions always require skills, particularly skill of hands, the engineering sector, or other professions which require physical strength or solving complex problems. So Mars is very closely linked to all technical careers. Saturn is considered as a master technician. It has a very exacting nature. So if you are in a profession which requires great detail, experience, for example, you're a programmer with 20 years of experience, you've become a master of that. So that's a very Saturn-like thing to do, and you can be very meticulous. So Mars and Saturn, in my view, are very closely linked to all technical careers. If Sun is involved, you may find yourself as a C-level executive. If Mercury is involved, then you could be solving analytical and logical problems, and work can also be more strategic. If Jupiter is involved within the technical sector, you may find yourself in management. When Moon and Venus are involved, then work can be centered around the human resources sector within the technical domain, or work which is considered highly creative. Now let's have a look at the nakshatras. Mrigashira is a nakshatra very closely linked to all kinds of creative work, but when it comes to technicality, since its planetary ruler is Mars, the person can be highly skillful. The same I can say if you have Hasta's influence over the 6th, 10th or the 11th house. Hasta is about skill of hands, so from a carpenter to a surgeon, you'd see that your work can be technical. This is a sign the work is skills driven. With Chitra, you could be known for your craftsmanship, and therefore architects, not only within the physical world but also in the IT world, can be seen from Chitra. Dhanishta, in my view, is also linked to technicians, particularly works which require a sense of timing and rhythm. For example, you may find yourself working on a complex machinery where timing is super important. With Anuradha, I find the ones who are problem solvers, which are highly complicated, the problems, and the work can also be more research driven. With Uttabharapada, there could be high responsibility on the shoulders of the technician, but work is also very similar every day. For example, you're working on a power grid, overseeing what's happening, doing your checks, and that's something you do on a daily basis. That's Uttabharapada. With Swati and Revati, your work can be within the transportation sector, roads, railways, transportation over sea. And with Shravana, within the technical sector, your work can be in the telecom industry. Among signs, Virgo, in my view, is very closely linked to technical careers, as Virgo is all about working out details. So these are all combinations that could indicate your work can be in the technical field, and I hope this has been helpful. Now, all kinds of artistic careers, in my view, are Venus related. So if you are a designer of any kind, whether it's in the fashion industry or you are working in television, films, media, or the music sector, all these professions, in my view, are Venus related. So if you have the 6th, 10th or the 11th house linked to Venus, there's a high possibility you could be in an artistic career. If Moon is involved, your work can also involve imaginative power. Naturally, every creator, every inventor, every artist has to rely on one's imagination. The Moon, in my view, is also strongly linked to careers which are artistic. With Mars, you could be a builder, like an architect, so therefore your work is creative and at the same time technical. With Jupiter and Mercury, you could be a composer of music, or work can also be in literature. You can also be involved in art direction, particularly with Jupiter. With Sun, you can end up being a public figure. With Saturn, you could be involved at jobs which are more technical in nature. For example, you could be an editor, a video editor, a graphic designer, or something similar. Now, what about houses? I would classify the 5th house as very strongly linked to all careers which are creative. As far as nakshatras are concerned, Bharani, if you have an influence of Bharani on the 6th, 10th or the 11th house, you could end up creating things which haven't been done before. So there's going to be a lot of innovation behind your creations. With Rohini, your creative work can be centered around luxury goods and services. For example, you could build like a sculpture which is highly valuable. With Mrigashira is about presenting the most refined version of your creation. For example, a theater performance or a music you have composed. I have seen many examples in my experience of people who have Mrigashira strong influence and they find themselves working in the music sector. With Ashlesha, your work can be centered around fashion and glamour, and you would possess the ability to captivate the attention of people through means of persuasion and seduction, even, as that's related to Ashlesha. With Magha, your creative work could be centered around making a name for yourself, and it can also be centered around ancient forms of art and also to museums and galleries. With Purva Falguni, it's directly linked to TV, films and the media sector. With Chitra, you could be an architect or a builder. With Hasta, your creations could be built through your hands, the skill of hands, like a potter. With Jyesta, you could be involved in innovation of some kind, including of the technical nature. With Purvashadha, your work can be centered around purification and preservation. With Dhanishta, you'll always possess a sense of rhythm and timing, and therefore you could be working in the music industry, and you could end up making a huge name for yourself in whichever creative industry you follow. With Revati, you possess high imaginative power. In fact, just yesterday I was in touch with someone who had Revati's strong influence, and her intention was to be a creative writer. With Shravana, your creativity could be expressed through mass media. You could end up becoming a TV host, for example. The signs I look for are signs of Leo and Libra, as they are very strongly linked to artistic careers. If you plan to be an artist, I hope you have few of these combinations in your chart. So if you like to pursue a career which in your view is uncommon, you may have Rahu and Ketu's influence over your 6th, 10th or the 11th house, as professions which are uncommon are directly linked to these two planets. I also have a few nakshatras which might lead you to a career which is uncommon. Ashlesha is one. which might lead to you following a career which does not conform to societal norms. For example, you can become a therapist without having the necessary qualifications. With Bharani, you might end up doing things which are never done before. With Shravana, you might be in a profession of connecting people or places which haven't been connected before, and therefore people might find your profession to be highly unusual. With Vishakha, you might go to the extremes in chasing your goals, and therefore people might find the way you are doing what you are doing is highly uncommon. With Shatabisha, again, there's the possibility of you going to the extreme, challenging yourself too hard, and even falling prey to addictions, and therefore people might feel how you are doing what you are doing is extremely unusual. With Swati, there would be a fondness that you might have to continue to move on in your life, both on a mental and on a physical plane, and therefore people might feel you have a very unsettled career, which others might find is uncommon. And with Ardra, you may have a love for the wildlife, which might lead you to a profession or path which is uncommon. Now, the last 3 nakshatras I shared were ruled by Rahu, and I think Rahu's influence on your career related houses can lead to a profession which is highly uncommon. Thank you for watching this video till the very end. I know it's a very long video and I've shared many combinations. If you have found any combination that I have described to be unclear, please feel free to post a comment in the comment section and I'll try my best to explain it. And if you'd like to stay in touch, please subscribe to this channel. This is it. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.